So welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. This is our second webinar in our new little series that we started doing. And they're just little short half-an-hour presentations on topics that we encounter a lot in the work that we do. And so tonight we'll be talking about understanding behaviour. So tonight we'll just cover a little bit about us in the webinar and how tonight will proceed. So that's where we'll start. Then we're going to go into understanding the reasons behind behaviour and thinking about reshaping behaviour. We'll have a little bit of time for questions at the end, and then just some final notes before we wrap things up at the end of that. So welcome, thanks for joining us. Obviously, as I said, this is only our second webinar so far, so just bear with us. We're still kind of working out the technology and things, still learning what people are liking. So today on the line we have myself, I'm Jessica Berryman. I'm one of the directors and consultants with Hatchings London. We're an early childhood development and behaviour specialist business. So we help parents with children with behavioural concerns, with language delays that have a behavioural element, tantrums, we do difficult fussy feeding, do a whole range of different things. And Kaylin, one of the other consultants that works at one of our other directors, is on with us tonight.
Hi all.
So tonight's webinar, we'll be talking about why behaviours occur to help you better understand the how. So that is to say that we won't be talking too much tonight about how to change behaviour, but how to think about behaviour in order to better change it. But we'll be doing some more series in the future based off of this work that will help you understand how to change behaviour a little bit more. But we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end as well if you want to go through some specific examples. So I just want to kick things off tonight with reframing how we start to think about behaviour, because behaviour seems to be something that people assume people know how to do, and there's a lot of very complicated thoughts and approaches to it. So this is one of my favourite quotes when it comes to talking about behaviour in children. If a child doesn't know how to read, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to swim, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to multiply, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to drive, we teach. If a child doesn't know how to behave, we teach, punish. Why can't we finish the last sentence as automatically as we do others? I think this is a really important point, that behaviour is taught to children. It doesn't come innate within them. And as the parents and carers in their lives, that's what we're here to guide. So there are really two elements to behaviour. There is understanding behaviour and replacing behaviour. So first, we always have to understand what drives our child's behaviour. And as behaviour specialists, we call this the function of the behaviour. So that is, why does our child do what they do, and what keeps the behaviour going? Once they find something new and wonderful to use, why do they keep using it? And once we understand why they keep using that behaviour, we can start to really examine what we can do to change the behaviour and reshape it into something more positive and that improves the relationship on both sides of the equation. So it's not just about your child, being able to behave better or, really respond in the way you want them to, but it's also about them being able to connect better with you. If they're getting their needs met, they can communicate what they want much more effectively. And it creates a really nice and harmonious relationship for everybody. So when it comes to thinking about behaviour, we have to start with the ABCs. That is to say, we start with antecedent, behaviour, and consequence. So as interventionists and parents and professionals and anyone who's involved in a child's life, the bit that people tend to really focus on is the behaviour. That is the bit that happens. So this is, it can be from anything from talking back, it can be following instructions, that's a behaviour, it can be tantrums. Behaviour is a really wide-ranging thing. So it's anything that a child or adult or whoever the person you're examining is does. It can't be something that a dead man can do. So this is a really important thing it's not the absence of behaviour. But the really important thing when we're trying to work out what's driving a behaviour or the function is the antecedent and the consequence. So antecedent is anything that comes before a behaviour. So this could be asking our child to put on their shoes. This could be turning off the TV. This could be asking for the iPad back. These are all really common antecedents. What happens after that? The immediate reaction is the behaviour. So that could be an argument between you and the child. It could be the child saying no. It could be tears. It could be, the child quite happily goes and puts on their shoes and does a great job. Consequence is what happens after, and this is what keeps the behavior going. So when your child goes, you ask the child to put on the shoes, they go to the door and put on the shoes, you praise them, and they think, that was great, fantastic, I want to get more of that praise. And the next time, they're more likely to put their shoes on when you ask. At the same time, when we think about something like the iPad, the antecedent is being told to turn off the iPad. The behavior is having an argument about the iPad, and the consequence might be, you're having a rough day, you give your child back the iPad. And so in that circumstance, the consequence for their behavior was that they got access to what they wanted and they got to keep the behavior going. So these kind of 3 things are really important when it comes to thinking about behavior and how we start to decode the behavior to better connect with our child. So to find out what the function is, we just have to remember that everybody eats. This is my favorite acronym for remembering the 4 functions of behavior. So there are 4 main reasons that people do what they do. Escape. So to get, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory for most people, is to get away from a situation, get away from a person, get away from a location. It's about getting out of what's going on. Then we have attention. So that's to gain attention or connection from somebody. And then we have tangible, so that's something that's a classical iPad's dilemma, is the tangible access to an item, but it could also be food, toys, iPads, all sorts of things. And sensory is because it feels good. So these are things like, children like to run around the garden. They like to run around the garden because it feels good. They enjoy doing it, and that's why they keep running because it feels good each time they do it. So tonight we'll be starting with talking about escape. This is a really common one that we've been seeing out of COVID, and I think the example we'll use at the end will be very representative of what people have been seeing in their own home. So escape behavior is about getting the removal of a person, object, activity, or location that the child no longer wants to do or be around. Escaping can be one of the more challenging aspects of dealing with children with these sorts of behaviors, because it often looks a lot like they're not listening, or sometimes, and often more challenging for a lot of adults, it looks like outright defiance. And so in these situations, there's often a few things going on. Firstly, there's the fact that a child might not want to do an activity, but it can also be the way a child communicates that they don't want to do an activity. You might not know that they don't want to do something until they're on the floor and yelling about it. But maybe if they talked to you beforehand, then we would be able to negotiate it and, come around to an agreement with them. Especially for our kind of more school-age children, maybe not so much for our little ones, but there is some really simple language that children can really easily understand. And so I think this is one that Kaylin, you and I have been seeing quite a bit recently. Your child yells and throws themselves on the floor when asked to sit at the table or complete an activity. So if we were thinking about this example in terms of A, B, C, the antecedent would be that you ask them to sit at the table. The behavior would be the throwing themselves on the floor and the crying. And the consequence is what happens. So maybe you don't ask them to follow through and sit at the table, and so they get out and they get to go back to playing. In which case, the behavior is allowing that escape and allowing the cycle of, okay, when I'm tantrum, I don't have to do something, and so I get to keep doing it, keep going back to what I want to do. And so it becomes a really successful behavior for them. But there are other things we can do, like teaching a child to ask to do the activity later, or asking for breaks. If it's a really tricky activity, then you can start to have that conversation. So the ideal chain that we would want to see is the antecedent is you ask your child to do something, but the behavior is they say, oh, I really don't want to do that. Can I have a break? Can I do that later? And you start to chain up a really nice cycle between you and your child that is much more communicative and respectful, rather than, tantrum driven. Kaylin, what do you think about that one?
To add to that, I think it's always thinking about in terms of how can we teach the functional behavior. So what do we want them in the long run to be doing? So what is the replacement that's functional for the child to learn? Often it can get in a bit of a negative cycle, and we'll go on to talk about this probably in the coming weeks, but with the negative reinforcement of saying no, or the child trying to follow through, if we don't teach the replacement behavior, they're not really learning any functional communication for how we can treat this.
So our next one that we're going to talk about is attention. And again, this has been a particularly challenging one for parents during the COVID situation. You know, working from home full time has been quite challenging, and children have been really attention seeking throughout this period. So when we're thinking about attention, there's a few things to remember. Attention can also be about connection. So a lot of the time the reason your child is attention seeking is because they want to have that connection with you. They want to spend time together. And they really want to develop that relationship with you. And that attention maintained behavior isn't just about good attention, it's also about the less pleasant side of attention. So it can be you yelling at your child is also a form of attention that can keep a behavior going. So I think, again, we'll go through this in terms of an example. So the behavior we'll talk about is that my child throws toys when I'm talking to other people. So the antecedent to this, if I was thinking about it in terms of the ABC that we talked about before, that we want to keep reframing things in terms of, would be that the antecedent is I'm talking to my partner, and the behavior is my child starts throwing their toys. And the typical consequence is that you go and give your attention to the child to stop them throwing the toys. You say, you know, we don't throw toys, that's not what we do with them. And so the conversation with your partner ends, you're now focused on the child. And whilst it's always important to deal with things like throwing, what we also need to teach our child in that situation is that instead of throwing the toys to get your attention and initiate that contact with you, they could also come and ask for your attention. But this doesn't always occur to children, especially young toddlers. This is a really common age group we see this in. You know, older children have the language to initiate these sorts of things, but younger children don't necessarily have that language. And it's still very cause and effect driven, so it can be a bit more challenging. So when we have a behavior like this, the thing we want to think about is that, okay, my child really wants attention. What's a better way I can show them to get my attention? So it could be that whenever your child throws a toy, you say, oh, we don't throw toys, but if you ask for mummy's attention, you can have it. And then you practice with them, but we'll go into that a little bit later. Kayla, what did you think about attention?
I think to add to that is when you're using the replacement behavior, you gave a great example. But on top of that, in terms of a child with nonverbal, a way of non-verbally communicating is they could tap your shoulder, you could teach them to tap your arm, you could teach them to walk over to you and really give you communication non-verbally, so that it doesn't always have, if they're young and don't have those words, we can teach them in a way still to functionally communicate with us that they want our attention.
Brilliant. Yeah, and that's exactly right, Kaylin. Those younger children are the more challenging ones in terms of that, and teaching them other ways like the shoulder tap is a great way of getting you there, reducing that behavior. So we're up to the T in everybody eats, tangible access. So tangible is pretty much what it sounds like on the box. It's about having something physically in your hands that you can have. So it can be toys, food, clothing, iPads, sports equipment, anything that you physically interact with and that your child really wants to own themselves. The thing to look out for tangibles is that a lot of attention-seeking behavior is mistaken for tangibles. So it looks like children are wanting something, access to a particular object, but actually a lot of the time what they're wanting is the argument and the attention that comes from it. So just keep that one in mind when you're trying to decode your behavior at home yourself. That have a think and be like, okay, is the consequence that I talk to my child about this a lot? And if it is, you should be looking at an attention function as well. But I think the most common, and I think we'll probably get some questions on this one later, given it's the most common question we've been encountering during COVID-19, is the behavior is your child is nagging for the iPad. So when thinking about things like this, tangible access, a really good thing to think about is scheduled. So if there's something your child is persistently wanting attention for, whether it wanting access to, whether it's an iPad or a particular toy, that sort of thing, it's becoming, very challenging on your relationship, that constant back and forth about negotiating access. So having a schedule that provides that time, and providing access throughout the day on that set schedule is a much nicer way of kind of getting around that. So it gives your child access that they want, but decreases that nagging behavior. And you'll find after you start a schedule, first day or two might be a bit of a shock, but after that, children really get into it, really enjoy that they can have a more positive relationship with you because they don't feel like they're constantly having to come and ask for something and not knowing when they're going to get it, because they know it's definitely coming because you talked about it and you've scheduled it together. I think that's the most common one we've been seeing, isn't it, Kaylin? The nagging for the iPad.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point about using a little bit more of a schedule and visuals and whatnot. Always applying more visuals can not hinder a child. It can always give more to their general understanding of knowing when it's accessible and when it's not.
And the last one today is sensory. So sensory is often the trickiest area, and one that you really, if you suspect sensory kind of involvement, so that it's happening because it feels good and you want to like change this behavior, we'd really recommend that you reach out to a professional, whether it be your child's teacher, an OT, speech and language pathologist, one of the Hatchlings team. It's really something that needs to be done really sensitively to the child's needs. So sensory behavior is things that happen because it feels good or provides a release to the child. And what we need to remember here is that it does that for the child. It's not necessarily about what we would enjoy. So just because you think it's unpleasant doesn't mean that it's not a sensory driven behavior. So when we kind of look at sensory behaviors, one of the clues that that it might be a sensory behavior and is driven by this kind of need is often that antecedent can often be environmental changes, so under or overstimulation or big changes. And often there isn't a clear consequence. There's no, you know, they might engage in the behavior and the consequence changes every time. There's no clear function to it. And that's when we should be really looking at that kind of sensory aspect. So this is one that I have worked on. I had a very lovely little girl who was chewing her hair, but and also lots of other objects. So she was trying, you know, picking up sticks off the street, some rocks and things like that. And so when we looked at this behavior, there was no clear consequence, no clear antecedent. It happened kind of, you know, when things were quite quiet. And so we thought there might be a sensory component. So we got an occupational therapist in with us, and she recommended, we had to rule out some medical things, and that's why we always encourage you to do it under professional guidance. After that, she recommended things like crunchy foods, so that our child could get that sensory input that they wanted without having to access it through chewing their hair and things like that. How about you, Kaylin? What kinds of sensory behaviors have you seen?
I've seen spinning. I've seen kind of, circles where regulation is kind of at medium levels, and you kind of just need to put them on a little bit more of a schedule, either using a visual to try to work on those types of sensory diet type things, which is more given by an OT professional. Out, as you said, chewing, squishy things. There's lots of, on top of this as well, there's lots of, as an OT would recommend, and we would recommend, is lots of sensory type toys that we can implement within that sensory behavior.
And I think this is also a really common one that we see is, can there be more than one function? So sometimes behavior is driven by one thing, or maybe it's a little bit attention, or a little bit access, or a little bit sensory, and a little bit escape. Absolutely. People are all really complex, and children, just like adults, kind of do have multiple behaviors with multiple functions. So, you know, we all have complex reasons for why we do what we do. And when children are exactly the same, sometimes they might do it because it feels good, but they might also get some attention from it, and those two things combined together can keep the behavior going. So if you think there might be two factors driving it, then you can absolutely be right. So I just think that's a really important one to list there, because, you know, there's often a kind of misconception that behavior you know, has one function and that's that, but you know, it's really, really common to see multiply mixed behaviors. So when it comes to, this is something we'll be covering in one of our future webinars, is that you want to rehearse the outcome you want. So the thing that when we understand behavior, we can then work out how to replace it and reshape it. So when you're looking at your own child's behavior and you want to start restructuring things a little bit and you've got something you really want to work on, start collecting the information and work out why. Just write it down. So make yourself a nice little grid. Okay, this is the behavior. What happened exactly before? What happened exactly after? And once you've got 2 or 3 examples, you'll probably be able to pick out the pattern mostly yourself, actually, and see what's happening. Okay, every time my child screams, actually, I don't get followed through, and they get to go back to playing. And so obviously the function of the behavior there might be escape. And so you can then start to think about, okay, so I don't want them to scream when they don't do something. So let's have a look. Oh, sorry. Let's have a look at some replacement behaviors. So I can think about teaching my child to come and ask for attention. I can think about teaching my child to ask for a break. I can, teach my child to play by themselves. But the thing to really remember is you can't practice new skills when emotions are running high. So you really want to try and practice the new skills in low stress situations, even if it feels a little bit silly and a little bit contrived. So you might practice with Teddy, and Teddy can be mummy, and you can role play, and that sort of thing is really beneficial. And the most important step, praise. If you see your child use the replacement behavior you've taught, even if you had to remind them, if they started to get a bit grumpy about something, you said, remember, use your words, and they use their words, make sure you praise them. And that will strengthen that behavior pathway, and you'll see that behavior keep on coming. So things to remember from tonight: if you think it might be sensory, consult an occupational therapist. If you need a recommendation, please just get in contact and we'll put you in contact with some people in our area. Collect your data. It might sound a little bit rigid and it might sound a little bit over the top, but if you write it down, it will help you see that pattern so much more clearly, and something that could have been a mystery to you, just by writing it down, often the mystery kind of disappears. And always remember that support is available. Our team's always here to support you if you've got any problems or you want to have a sounding board. There are also tons of other really wonderful people in your child's life already, I'm sure, you can talk to about behaviour, who might be able to help guide you through this whole process. Your child's teacher, their key worker, any other professional, speech, OT. There's a wide range of professionals out there to help and support, and reaching out is always the most important thing. So I think we've got a couple of minutes left for some questions. So give me a second. One moment. Sorry, this is my first time accessing the questions.
We have one here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kaylin.
My child always throws a tantrum when it is time to finish the iPad. How can I end this behavior?
So that's definitely one of the things that we've kept seeing. So with the tantrum with the iPad, that's probably most likely about access, right? Your child wants more time with iPads and they're throwing a tantrum. So what's appropriate depends on your child's age, but one of the things that we would always recommend people to do is to put it under a timer firstly. So, okay, when you hand over the iPad, you find a timer, you put it on together, you explain when the timer goes off, it's time to put the iPad away, and that you really stick to that. That means that even if you want the child to finish up early, then you have to kind of sit there as the adult and let it go and really follow the timer. You can also put in place, I think, visual schedules that Kayla mentioned before, and they're a really good way. First we're gonna do some work together, then we can have the iPad, so you set the expectation throughout the day. You can also teach your child to ask for more iPad time. So that's always a really important one. So as soon as you ask them, you might be like, okay, it's time to finish up the iPad. And they start to yell immediately. You can be like, okay, let's just calm down. Why don't you ask me? Say, Mummy, can I please have some more iPad time? Or Mummy, more iPad. Depending on your child's language ability. And when they use that language, honor the language, and really as you'll strengthen up that pathway, you'll start to get a little bit less resistance on that aspect. Kaylin, do you have anything more to add on that one?
No, I think you said it very well, Jess, but I think the other side is just, I guess when you're setting these visual schedules and those timers and reminders, you're kind of just putting a little bit of boundaries in place for what's, you know, accessible and what's doable for the child. So, and also what's doable for you, because keep in mind, you can't be monitoring an iPad all the time. So I think once they have those boundaries in place and they're, you know, better able to learn kind of where you put your foot down, and, you know, where you can work together in a harmonious relationship. So it's not always a battle over the iPad.
Yeah, no, and I think that's exactly it, Kaylin. Unfortunately, we actually don't have any more time for questions tonight. We are almost at the end. But if you do have any more questions about tonight's webinar, please just send an email at our contact, and we will definitely get back to you and answer any questions. And we're sorry that we didn't have enough time tonight to get through the rest. All right, let's go. So at the end, we'll just be sending out a short survey. If you can complete it, that would really be great. And we'll be sending out some resources as well for people who complete the survey. And that's everything. So next week, we'll be covering dealing with escape behavior. So that's really delving deep into this kind of the behavior that we talked about this week, and what we can do to really all the ideas that we can give you guys to help manage behavior across a wide range of age groups. So thank you so much for coming tonight, and we hope you all enjoyed. Thank you very much.
Thank you.